Nothing that is happening right now is original to this presidential seat. Nothing that we are seeing is original. Nothing that we are seeing is founded on anything other than fear, cowardice, and exploitation. So, one of the biggest things I want to remind folks is that the very concept of race, the very concept of distinguishing people by racial hierarchies emerged in the mid 17th century by none other than the colonial elite. The colonial elite who were afraid of losing their economic strength, their economic possessions. So when indentured European servants, Black servants, and other folks started burning down cities like Jamestown, when that started happening, the white elite at that time, they didn't call themselves white, the colonial elite were really worried. Really worried. So guess what they did? And all of this is historically evidenced. And historically evidence means this is historical information, that there are archives filled with this information. So let me tell you what happened when the colonial elite feared that they were going to lose their economic foundation. They created a codified racial society that served as a function of a few things, but most importantly, check this out. My purpose here is to educate people. My purpose on social media for the last 20 years has been to educate people, because education is the biggest threat to dictatorships and fascism. Education is the biggest threat to civilization, Elon Musk. Just so you know, just letting you know, right? Just a little reminder that education is a threat, right? Here we go. So let me remind people, I'm not the first to be saying this. I'm just sharing the wealth, the educational wealth. Let's check this out, shall we? Let me flip this over so that we can enjoy this very educational video clip together. All right.
Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor...
Okay, I'm stopping this video right there. We're going to keep watching it. You could watch this on YouTube. It is under Tim Wise Part 3, The History of Whiteness. I'm going to stop right there because I got to go back. How did race become a thing in the colonies in mid-17th century? What has been the purpose of this fraudulent term? Is this, let's go back, let's listen again.
Begun to work, right? You could turn people, black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work. Right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly, right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right?
This is all, this is the same,
heel spurs. Send
talking
some
about
poor
Trump.
kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like, how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer, telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric.
By the way, this is an old video, right? He was talking about the first Trump cult era, and we can very easily apply this to this new presidency. Let's keep listening.
Telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them. All right? That's the argument. Keep in mind, there's been a net outflow of Mexican folk from this country, out of this country in the last 10 years. Right now, border crossings and actual in-migration at the lowest level they've been since the 1970s. So anybody who believes that is a damn fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone who doesn't care.
Okay, let's go there. Okay. The biggest tool that white supremacy uses is ignorance. And not just innocent ignorance. It is a institutionally created ignorance that celebrates and applauds ignorance, celebrates and applauds unfounded truths and evidence. Okay. Add a little emotion to it, sprinkle little rage to it, and this is what you find. So let's go back once again. How do these lies, how do these concepts get replicated, reproduced, recycled time and time again? We are talking about a concept that was created centuries ago, in the middle of the 1700s. I'm sorry, in the middle of the 1600s, right? Is where this concept of race completely blew up in the colonies. And again, who benefited? The colonial elite. Sound familiar? Who are the elite of this country today? Elon Musk? The Google people? Bezos? It's the same thing. It's the recycled, generated circle of white supremacy and wealth generation. And at the same time, they want to demonize. Thank you, Zuckerberg. Yes, absolutely. Which, by the way, Zuckerberg removed the fact-checking element because it was poorly done. Interesting that this is all being done before Trump took office, right? It's a very institutional, systemic way of keeping us ignorant and uninformed so that we can be disconnected from each other's humanity, from our commonalities, and constantly think that people that look like me are the enemy. That people that look like me are the enemy. So let's keep educating ourselves and our children, right? Let's keep educating ourselves, because if we do not educate ourselves, we are going to have unchecked, unmarked lies continuing to be told, right? And they're not just told, they are amplified and replicated by these algorithms where TikTok, I don't know where you're at with this because I was very disappointed how you caved into Trump, but let's talk about Google, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, okay? Easily being geared towards the creation of a massive ignorance that preserves itself as patriotism, that presents itself as American nationalism. And let's not forget that we saw Elon Musk doing the Nazi salute twice, not once, twice. So how is this happening? Once again,
Fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone lowest level they've been since the 1970s. So anybody who believes that is a damn fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone who doesn't care, right? But he says the reason you don't have a job is those brown folks took them.
So what you just watched was from April 20, 2017 by Tim Wise, okay? This is completely applicable to what is happening now. Now, there's one more video I want to show you because people don't know this history. We are not taught the creation of race and whiteness and blackness. We are not taught the intentions behind them. We are taught, oh, that's just the civil rights movement. And here, no. Let's go back to the original foundation of race. So the next video I'm going to share with you, it's the history of John Punch. Okay. It's a little poor quality. Excuse that, but the idea is there.
White.
By 1640, indentured servants were essential to the profits of Virginia tobacco farmers. Their labor made tobacco the colony's most profitable export.
Three men on the same farm, doing the same labor, being harassed and oppressed on a comparable level, to the point that these three men chose to flee their owner.
John Bunch, Victor, and James Gregory crossed the Virginia border into southern Maryland. Days later, they were captured and returned.
Plaintiff, please step forward. Take place. My lord, I ask your punishment against these indentured servants.
In the colony's highest court, it was said that Hugh Gwynn's servants caused him considerable loss and prejudice.
I want you to punish them, my lord. You will serve 3 more years.
The two white men are sentenced to simply a number of years added to their indentures. For John Punch, the one black among these three men, his fate is infinitely worse. It's servitude for life.
For the rest of your life.
Now, there's no law that says that John Punch had to have been enslaved for life, but it was clear that 1640 is sort of the turning point, the beginning of the point where Africans are going to be treated differently as opposed to whites who are indentured servants.
Rather than distinguishing people because they are unfree, people are being distinguished now because they're black or white.
Okay, I shared this with you because we are not taught about how race and slavery, whiteness and slavery became the norm in the colonies. We are not taught this history, okay? And it is important, very, very important, that we understand this. So when people are wondering about this, they're worried. This is the history that we're all missing out on. All of us are missing out on this history. So I hope you enjoyed this. I am here to educate people on the truth, on the real history, on what is happening in this country, in this really, really paranoid response to the fact that this country is diverse, that this country is the home of Native American people, that Native American people are the owners of this land, that a massive genocide was committed against Native people, massive genocide, disruption of African nations as well. So all of these things, but we're not supposed to be taught that. We're not supposed to know that. And we're not supposed to understand where the creation of whiteness comes from. We're just supposed to be ignorant, complacent, and abiding citizens. Why is knowledge and education such a threat? Keep that in mind. Keep educating yourself. Keep questioning. Keep being critical. Because that is a threat. And if we are not understanding our history, if we are not learning, then we are hurting our own humanity. Knowledge is power, as cliche as it sounds. That also means the absence of knowledge is lack of power. The promotion of lies, institutionally created through algorithms, the ignorance to repeat such lies is also a danger. All right, y'all. Keep learning. Please check out the work of Tim Wise. Check out the work of many amazing anti-racist scholars. There are so many. The information is there. The research is there. Everything is at our fingertips. We must be responsible with ourselves, with our thoughts. We must dissolve and dismantle white supremacy, the ideas of white supremacy, the stereotypes, the ignorance. And we have to call it what it is. White supremacy. White supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. In the form of a cult of Americanism. That is what is happening here. And one last thing, because I am an educator and I like people to know this, it's the fact that we need to know real history. We need to understand history. Okay, let's share with you one last thing before I go. One last thing before I go. Because so many people, hang on. Much better. Okay, so one last historical element for you. Okay. The system of American slavery started in 1526, ended with the Reconstruction era, the 13th Amendment of 1865. The Reconstruction lasted from 1865 to 1954. I'm sorry, from 1865 to 1877. Okay. And then we have today. I want you to think about this when we're talking about, oh, race has nothing to do with it. Race. How long has this country been around? For about 250 years. About 250 years. The enslavement of African people lasted longer than this country has been in existence. Yet, we are taught that this has nothing to do with American history. Nothing to do. The enslavement of African people lasted longer than this country has been alive. We need to understand this historical truth, not conspiracy theory. This is researched. By the way, this is from Dr. Joy DeGruy. This is researched information. We must learn to be critical thinkers. We must learn to understand and read history, primary sources, and filtered through the lens of white supremacy. This is very, very important. So, lastly, I just showed you a clip from John Punch. Why do I talk about this? Because we need to understand how in the colonies, when white and black folks were organizing against the colonial elite, that was a threat to colonial elite wealth. So they started separating. John Punch case, 3 indentured servants run away. 3 of them are caught. In 1640, this is in Jamestown, Virginia. John Punch ran away with 2 indentured servants. They are caught, brought to court. The 2 white servants got years added to their indentures, I think about 4 years. John Punch, as a consequence of running away, got a lifetime of slavery status. This is the first historical case where this happens. Not only this, I shared with you this clip. We start seeing that people organizing interracial solidarity efforts were seen as a threat, where we have the emergence of the black codes, the slave codes. In 1680, Virginia's slave code, blacks could not get together in large groups, must have written permission to leave the plantation, and could only be gone for 4 hours. So the policing of black and brown bodies, in this case, we're talking very specifically about the black body, becomes a threat to colonial wealth. This is extremely important to understand. So please, I started this video sharing with you. You could see this on YouTube. Tim Wise, Part 3, The History of Whiteness. Please watch this video. I shared with you in the beginning of this clip. Please, let's educate ourselves on this. Let's understand the truth behind this history and how these concepts have been used with the intention of keeping us divided so that the elite can continue to thrive, dependent on our ignorance, dependent on our separation.